excited to hear Karise speak. I did a leadership course last year, and there were a bunch of really interesting speakers, but without question, Karise was the one that left me thinking and just really challenged me around the idea of leadership. She brings an incredibly strong academic background. She's Professor of Leadership up in University of Ulster Coleraine. She's published in a bunch of academic journals, and she's published her own book. But more than that, what's really interesting, she brings a love of business, so that really shines through. She's not just talking about leadership from an academic perspective. She really loves business and wants business to succeed practically. But she also brings a really interesting faith perspective, and she's able to weave her faith to some really credible leadership ideas and principles. So I'm not going to talk anymore. I just want to welcome you and pass you over to Karise.
Thank you, Andrew. Well, I definitely feel set up now after all that. But I suppose just to say it's really lovely to be here. And what is lovely, when I walked in this evening, I have got two of my work colleagues who I didn't know were coming and have just turned up, and some really good friends in the room, as well as my husband, possibly my biggest fan in the corner as well. So the reason that I am excited about tonight is that if we think about leadership, if we think about what we actually see in leadership and what we hear, I think a lot of us struggle to actually see what we want to see, or we see a lot of the negative around leadership. And I just want to unpack that tonight in terms of what it means to rewrite leadership, why I believe it is being rewritten, and what does that ultimately look like. So just to give you a little bit of background, first and foremost, married to Ali, and I have 4 children. I have a son, 21, right through, another one 18, through to 11, through to a toddler, age 3, and I'll tell you a little bit about that story later on. But essentially, yes, my job and a lot of my academic work is university based, but I was going to talk about this tonight, but I really believe we bring our whole selves to work. And I think that's the part that's missing, is that we see one part of a leadership that's on a platform that's staged and is polished. And actually, I think that's where a lot of the dissatisfaction comes from, because people are not seeing authentically what leadership really is in our whole lives. It's very much a hot topic. I mean, I know we've our ministers back in. I think it's now 2 weeks today. The ministers have been back up on the hill. So it's not just a hot topic in terms of Northern Ireland, but Brexit next week. Are we actually, or is it actually happening? And then if you think in terms of the world stage. So I think it's a big hot topic. There's lots of books written on it. And if you take all of that, one of the big things that we see lots of books, we see lots of self-help. If you read podcasts, you can watch them on TEDx. But actually, it's really interesting. We've got this huge resource. The actual industry is worth almost $400 billion in terms of leadership development. So we're pumping all this money into books and help and support. What is the output? What is it in terms of public leadership that we see? And it's really not adding up. And I think a part of it is really much that we see it, whether it's football managers, whether it's our politicians ruling with really low popularity ratings, whether it is we see the scandals in public leadership. But there's so much there that in the Western culture we are really struggling in terms of what great leadership is. And I have to say that's part of a frustration that I have, but that's why I think we really should reframe it. And I think in many ways we live in this incredible time. I was thinking about this, I'm starting to dip into a bit of the AI immersive technology, feeling really cool and current, given my more traditional background. But actually, we have cars that talk, we have this incredible, we have these robots that do work. We have all these incredible advancements in terms of where we are. Even in terms of healthcare and medicine, you think of where we are even 10 years on. And we have all of these conveniences and comforts that we have, but actually, where are we really? The world that we live in is really, that was just to keep me on time. My husband can give me a 5-minute warning. But actually, there's so much disruption, and I think you can see that in terms of China and the USA and all of that. And I think even, I was talking to somebody about this, but even the traditional businesses that we see are dying, like Flybe in the news last week was just quite shocking. We think of Thomas Cook and all of the big retailers. I was an undergrad at Ulster and I studied retail and distribution management, supply chain and retail businesses, and all of that work around the high street and the future high street. It's like what was I doing? And that was only, I think, 15, 16 years ago I did my PhD in that, and that's just how radical the change is. And I don't know if anybody in the room knows John Maxwell, in terms of the author, leadership guru. And I don't know if anybody's read his latest book, but I really encourage you to get it. And it's called The Leader Shift, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that tonight. But he says this, he says that fast is faster and forward is shorter. And what he means is that it's the pace of change that's actually what's causing a lot of problems. But it's the fact that, as businesses, what's a 10-year plan? When I studied business as undergrad, we did our 10-year plan, we did our interim, medium-term, 5-year plan, and then you did your 1-year short-term plan. I mean, where is that now? I mean, it's just absolutely unheard of. And I think what I'm trying to say is we've got all of this, but actually in terms of our human nature, where we're at in society, we're just not flourishing the way that one would expect with all the comforts and convenience and advancements. And I think that I was reading a book called Margin. I'm going to talk a little bit about that, but I think our challenge and why we're starting to see the need for rewriting leadership is that actually the game that the rules that we're playing by and the game that we're playing is very, very different. It's different rules. And it's a different world. And I think it's because we actually have to deal with so many more things. One person has to deal with so many more things than maybe someone would have maybe 20, well, even arguably 10 years ago. So I think, what is the big question for leadership? I think the number one skill, and the research that I've done will tell you that you need to be able to change. You need to be able to shift your mindset, to shift your strategy, and actually to shift your planning. And I think that is one of the biggest. And I think that the uncertainty, I mean, we can feel, I think we've all got a bit of the Brexit fatigue where we've talked about it for so long, but there's so much uncertainty, even having ministers in government. The big question now is what? Is there actually any money? Any new money? I mean, that is a big question now. So there's all of this uncertainty when you see our healthcare in crisis and when you see our education sector also in crisis. Is that my mic giving feedback? Possibly no. That's great. It's okay. So I think I just wanted to share a little bit where my interest and my journey in this, and I just want to rewind about 10 years ago. I became head of the business school on the Korean campus, and I had been a researcher. I was a lecturer, and if you can imagine, I was taught by this incredible team of academics. Went on and did a PhD, and all these people that taught me, and then I got a job, and I became one of them, and actually joined their team. That was weird, because a lot of them were, in terms of an age difference, were a lot older, but they accepted me over time. I got there, and then 5 years into that, I was asked to take on the job as head of school. That wasn't okay. That was okay to become one of their peers, but actually then I was going to become their boss. So, I mean, of course it was weird for them, and it was very challenging, but one of the main things that caused me to think about was around the stereotype of leadership. So I was only 36. I was probably the youngest female leader to lead a business school, but actually I really struggled with the stereotypes of women in leadership. And in academia, one of the stereotypes, and I think we're changing that. So we have incredible women in the room that are changing it through our network. But actually, one of the things was successful women that got promoted and made their way to the top were either, I'm saying this all with grace in my perception, either had no children, or if they did, they had no relationship with their children and they were on their second and third marriage. And these were career obsessed women. And I just did not want to be that. In fact, I turned down the job 3 times. It took the dean to pull me aside on the third chance, where I knew I was career suicide if I'd said no at that point. But there was that sort of unwritten rule that I had to become emotionally inaccessible as a woman because I had this position. Now, I was only managing 25 staff. There was probably about 800 students in the school. It's not huge, but there was just that stereotype that I really, really struggled with, that I just thought there has to be another way. So that's where my hunger came to research and to find out what it is I could, I wanted to find the model that would fit me. I mean, totally wrong, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about that. But I wanted to be a really great leader. And the only thing that I did at the beginning, hadn't a clue what I was doing, was I put a sign that said people before paper. Anybody knows a university, we're a large bureaucratic organisation. We love paper, we love emails, although we're doing a lot more about the paper, not less about the emails. But there was just this bureaucratic processing. We were so driven by the process. So I put up the people before paper mantra. And that's kind of, so my journey on that, I had a PhD in research. I got to actually work with small entrepreneurial businesses over a period of several years, where I got to meet and spend time with really great leaders. And then that work led me on, and I did work with governors in the prison service. So I worked with Ronnie Patton, and we did work around leadership there. And also in terms of HE and FE, I was doing work. And actually, it was all of that that I got to find out, and that's what I want to tell you a little bit about this evening. So what is the new story? I've told you this is why I think it's being rewritten. So what is the new story? Well, I'm here to tell you that actually it's an old story, and it's actually a story that I believe began over 2,000 years ago. And when I read the Bible, and when I look at the leadership there in terms of how Jesus has led and what the stories that he had and the impact and influence, I got to read a book by Karl Martin called Lead. And if you ever, you'll hear I love reading, so I'm sorry if I throw out any of the books. But this is an incredible book where he actually talked through the model of leadership through Jesus. And the one thing that I have found in my journey of faith is that when God wants a community transformed, when he wants a business that actually is going to bless people, when he wants a health service that cares deeply with empathy for people, he raises up a leader. And he's looking for a leader of character. He's looking for a leader that's actually after his own heart. And I think that many times, and I can testify to this, it's an unlikely leader. And that's how I felt when I became head of school. I was not the obvious choice. In fact, the dean told me I have no other options. You know, felt great. I was like, excellent, brilliant. And they all taught me, even worse. So that is, and it is, and I have to tell you that, people say, oh, you're the provost of the university. It's only a title, and that's why I want to start by telling you primarily, my main part of me is that I am married with 4 kids, and I do love Jesus, and my faith is very much part of my journey. And I also want to say that I actually believe that there is a place for ambition in leadership. Now, what I'm saying is I'm not talking about unhealthy, aggressive career, that pathway where you become obsessed with your career. That's not what I'm talking about. But I think there's an ambition that's needed that actually springs from a leader that wants to be used, and a leader that actually wants to have an impact. And that's where I was. And I think that part of this is that we think that in Northern Ireland, I do really struggle with, is keep yourself humble, don't build yourself up. don't talk about what you do, although that's the first thing we ask everybody. Oh, so what do you do after you get over their name? But there is something around the keep yourself humble, whatever, and it's wrong, because actually, it's not that we go out there with an egotistical mindset, but there's something there around a leader that wants to be used, that wants to have an impact. And I want to tell you, I read this literally last week. Rick Warren talked about humility. And I think this is something, and you'll get a pattern in terms of what I'm saying. Humility is not denying your strengths. It's being honest about your weaknesses. But I'm going to come on to that later. So the first thing that I believe that the world needs, so whether you're in business, whether you're in health, whether you're in the public sector, whatever your sphere of influence is, because I believe leadership is intentional influence. I don't believe it's about a title or about a budget or how many people you have reporting to you. I think a title is actually it's not where leadership starts, but influence. So the first thing that I believe that the world needs, and that your team leads, or wherever your context is they need and desire connection, a sense of belonging. I read a brilliant article in the Times on the 29th of December, just before the new year, and the headline in the Times article was 2010, the decade of disconnection. And I thought, what? Right, okay. And I actually read it, and they talked about if there was a time capsule attached to this decade, what would be in the time capsule? Can you guess? The iPhone. And this is what the article said. At the beginning of 2010, a third of us owned an iPhone. Do you know what it was by the end of 2019? 85%. And in fact, if you're between 16 and I think it's 25, it's 95% own an iPhone. So if you think back to 2010, it's a blink. In many ways, it was very, very unpopular for you to take your phone out when you were talking to somebody, or indeed take your phone out at a restaurant. And yet now, it sits pride possession and beside our cutlery as we eat, in a lot of cases. It's my personal, anybody knows me, I hate phones, and that's one of the things. Even I was telling my husband on the way up, Manchester have texting lanes in their motorway where people can drive their car and text. Yep, it's just unreal. So instead of going to a cashier, going to a supermarket where you talk to the cashiers, you're putting your goods through, where you go? You go to self-checkout. So instead of eating out, we can call out Just Eat or Delivery. If we take coffee shops, which apparently are definitely the growth aspect of the high street, or certainly saving the high street in one element, half the clientele are sitting there with their earplugs in and they're on their laptops. And instead of fitting the high shop, if you want to go and get some shopping, we just open Amazon. And then I do it. So I think on one hand, while the government is starting to wake up to realise the impact this has on our community and our civic spaces, there's only so much that they can do. And actually, as people, we are wired for connection. Anybody knows Brené Brown? That's what she talks about. And that is something that leaders that we need to understand. And we're starting to see people actually, on one hand, the iPhone was the luxury in 2010. Do you know what's luxury now? Detox from the iPhone. People are selling these weekends without phones. There's restaurants that have signs that say no phones allowed. That's what my house would say if I could put a sign up. And that is what it is, and we are wired for that, so we need to know that. The second one is actually hope. The world is crying out for something to believe in. And the Chartered Management Institute have a report. I don't know if there's anybody belonging to CMI. I'm a fellow and I absolutely love the resources. They do a lot of research. It's really, really current. And they actually said that belief is a scarce thing in business and in politics. Well, I think we get that one. So in many ways, we have these attractive statements as a business. We can have these great strategies, these purpose statements. But then employees, people on the edges, people low are just like, is that real? I don't really know if I believe in that. I'm not sure. So that belief is actually something that we really do struggle with. So we have this tension on one hand where we need to give our people some element of stability. But on the other hand, we need to look at all of the change and be able to pivot and to take advantage of the opportunity that change brings. So I believe as a Christian that we are actually called to change the environment and the atmosphere where we go. Okay, so I'm just going to nail that. And I think when we do that, we bring a glimpse of what Jesus intended wherever we go. And as I was chatting to David earlier, it's like, you don't need to use words. You know, I'm with colleagues from university, and there's different people that may not know that I have a faith, but I'd love them to know. And different people have said to me, what is it that's different? And when people ask, because it's what we had the event on Friday, you know, people won't remember what you say. None of you will probably remember a word that I said, but hopefully you'll remember how I made you feel. And when you talk to people, it's what they leave, that we talk about what they leave, I think is really important. And that is how we do it. And we are called to be light in the darkness. We're not called to have all the answers. We're called to listen and listen deeply. And we're called to bring that hope. And the last one is actually creativity. I think the world I know businesses are craving how can I solve this problem from a new perspective? How can I bring creative solutions? And I think the time for logical thinking is over. And I know that's a bit controversial, because I'll tell you why, in case you think what you're talking about. I think logic takes us at very best at a level playing field with your competitors. So if you think logically about business, at the very best, that might bring you up to the benchmark of your competitors. Okay? If you think about it logically, it should do. But actually, if you want to outmark your competitors, if you want to grow, then you need to be creative. And that's what brings creativity, always adds. And there's a thing that I do around businesses. I run a Lead to Grow programs for growing small businesses. And we do a design thinking. I don't know if anybody's heard of design thinking. So part of that is we do an activity with De Bono, the 6 hats. And this is where you actually tackle a problem. And you know, if you have a red hat, then you're the emotional hat, where you give your response. The black hat's the Mr. Critical. It's amazing how many business people love the black hat. I was trying to literally peel the black. No, you're not like black hat anymore. No, you've got to think from a different perspective. But those hats, actually, the 6 different hats, and then you've got the green, and you've got the white, and then you've got the blue, that's the manager, forces us to get out of these mental schemas that keep us stuck. So we get into these patterns of learned behaviour. Very hard to get out of if we want to be creative, and we have to look at things from different perspectives. So you probably think that's all very good. It's being rewritten. How is it being rewritten? How do we actually make that shift in order to be great leaders that bring light in the darkness, that bring the hope, that bring the connection and bring the creativity? For me, I actually think leadership is much more invisible than you first think. I think that's the part that's being written that we think. So for example, in academia, it would have been, and I think we're moving away from that. You know, previously I have heard people say to me, I'm trying to be careful what I'm saying, but you know, you've really got to wear the dress crease, the bar dress, and you've got to wear the red lipstick. I mean, people have actually said that. And don't forget the stiletto heels. And you're like, I mean, that is what you're told at the senior leadership level. And an element, there's still that in business as well. But actually, it's an inside-out job. So I want to do this last part to say that actually leadership is more invisible, and it starts. So if you have a faith tonight, and this is what is important to me, very, very first priority for me is actually comes from John 15. Whenever he talks about fruit on the vine, and Jesus says this: remain in me and I in you, and about bearing good fruit. And that is the element for me. That is where I have to keep coming back, because believe me, there's a lot of stuff I don't get, I don't understand, I really struggle with. Very counter to where I come from thing, but I'm not responsible for that. I'm responsible for myself. So that's the how first for me, is I shift as I go back to what Jesus has done for me and what he has for me. Because we get to change the atmosphere. We get to change the environment. That's the privilege that certainly I know I have. And that's the greatest gift. And Karl Martin said this is the lead book, lovely yellow book, and he said this: your relationship with God is personal, but it's not private. So when you're a leader, your relationship is absolutely personal, but actually the outworking of that is not private, because you want to change the atmosphere. And that is just my story. The second one is very practical, and I'm married to an executive coach who also owns his own small business. And one of the things that he always says is you've got to know yourself to grow yourself. So what I'm talking about here is that old adage of self-awareness. And actually, it's really interesting. I was sharing this on Friday. It's called the theory of the mind, but it's really, really simple. The human ability to deceive oneself and live in denial is a really powerful force. So have you ever... I work with people that are really talented, that are really smart, but they have a very, very low self-awareness. And that's really hard to work with. It requires a lot of maintenance. And what I'm saying here is not hold up a mirror and look at it through an Instagram filter or in black and white. I'm talking about actually being brave enough to go on that journey and make sure you have accountability of people around you to actually say to you, as you can imagine being married to an executive coach, that actually it's not good for marriage. He's not allowed to coach me. But there is that element of whereby, we can pick up all the faults in me. We can see it so easily in everybody else, but it's so hard to see in yourself, that you need to have those people, just 2 or 3, that can actually come along and say, I love what you did there, that was amazing, but maybe you can think about this. And one of the big things for me that I'm learning is that I have really high standards. So I have a problem with perfectionism. I do have a perfectionist tendency, so I've had to take feedback on that a lot, because in my head people don't add up. My expectations are here and they're here, which actually in the grand scheme of things is totally fine. It doesn't need to be right up there. So I'm learning a lot in that. And I think that's really, really important. So I want to finish with, I hope I'm doing okay for time, but I want to spend a bit of time for the last sort of 10-15 minutes in terms of what I call the leadership muscle. Okay, so I didn't want this to be a nice little talk about what's happening in the world and sharing my faith, but I want this to be a call for action, okay? And in the spirit of the new year resolutions, which I'm sure are all gone by the wayside now, this is actually about going to a gym in your head, in your workplace, in your business, and trying out some muscles for the first time, for some of you. And if you've ever decided, I'm going to get fit and make a New Year's resolution, you've got 2 choices. You can either get the magazines, watch the YouTube videos, even go to the supermarket and buy the food and do nothing about it. Or actually you go and you just go for it and you give it a go in the gym and see what happens. And that's it. And we know which one actually brings the results, okay? It's not hard to figure out. But there's one thing that I need to tell you, is that for us to make the leader shift for what the world needs today, it's going to be uncomfortable. So if you've ever done weights or you've run for the first time, it's really the discomfort in the resistance of your body for the first couple of times is really not nice, but that's what builds the muscle. So there's 4 exercises that I just want to share with you. The first one is adaptive capacity versus preserving the status quo. So on one hand, that skill to basically deal and embrace with change versus, no, I'm going to keep the status quo, all right? So John Maxwell says this, that you cannot be the same, you cannot think the same, and you cannot act the same if you hope to be successful in a world that does not stay the same. We've no choice in this. And as I said to you, if we want to see the growth in our business, if we want to see the influence in whatever sphere that we're in, then actually you have to embrace the change. You see, leadership is actually not a static thing, and I think that's part of the perception that we've had, that we see these leaders, they write these books, they do these podcasts, And it's almost like they arrive, like it's a destination, like, I'm here, look, here's my 101 leadership, here's my, whatever the blueprint is, whatever the plan has been, and that's how they sell their books. But there is no destination point in leadership. It is a journey that continually takes you on different twists and turns, but you never stop learning. And as I was saying, you must learn, you must unlearn, and then you relearn. And I cannot tell you how many times I study this stuff, and I'm like, even last week I was reading some more stuff and thinking, I have no idea. One of the things I want to talk about in a minute is about generosity in leadership. And this is a headline for the Chartered Management Institute, are saying the future of leadership, actually the leadership for now, is generosity, which is amazing. But anyway, I'm getting away. But one of the things I do want to say, adaptive capacity is this core skill. Okay, so that's what research is telling us, is this ability to change. And it's a skill. Some of us will find it easier to learn than others. I'm a control freak, don't like change, so I find it really hard. So it just takes me a little bit longer than some to actually do it, but I'm getting better with that. But we have to understand that we are hardwired to resist change. It's how we're made. Our brains really crave predictability, and our emotions desire the stability. So we don't want to be upset, do we? We don't want to, our brains don't want to say, oh, flip tomorrow, I've lost my key employee. What am I going to do? How am I going to replace that? Oh my goodness, this has happened. All of that is, Brexit was at the time, I think there's a little bit more. I'm not getting into the big debate, but there's so much element that was such a shock for people that actually it was just like this, So I think disruption will come in your life in many ways. For some, it might be a health issue. It could be losing your job. It could be getting a new job. It could be a personal challenge. It could be having your first child. It could be becoming a grandmother or grandfather. Disruption happens in all different guises and all different stages of life. But I want to tell you about my story of disruption. And it really does come back to the story at the beginning where I introduced my family to you. And at the age of 40, instead of going back to Mauritius where we went on honeymoon, which was the plan all along, I got to be in hospital and have my baby at 40. And I have to tell you that at the time, at the age of 39, I had made a decision to actually leave the university. I had made a decision, we were going through a redundancy process, and I had made a decision that I was going to leave. And I was pretty sure my boss wanted me to leave at this point. That was how well it was all going. So she was rooting for me to go, and I had this great plan of having my own business, and I was going to help business leaders, and I was going to do all this stuff. And one day, after making an appointment with the hospital, because I thought something was really wrong with me, I found out I was pregnant. And I have to tell you, and I told this story on Friday when I was sharing that, and it makes me very, very emotional about it, because I cried a lot. I had 3 kids. I'd have loved to have had 4, but it wasn't the right time. So my life was really disrupted. And in the first 3 months, I cried a lot. I was very, very sick. I was very ill, and all sorts of worst pregnancy ever. And actually I did, and I came to terms, I couldn't talk about it for a number of times, and Karise here was one of the first people that we told, and I did, because there was so much, what am I going to do? I'm leaving the university, I'm left, I can't set up a business and have a baby at the same time, what? Meanwhile, my eldest son was doing his UCAS forms for university. So, it's just not normal at all. But actually, I have to tell you that, and I've told this story a couple of times, God knew exactly what I needed, because actually that was the best disruption for me physically. I struggled with it, but once I got over the first 2 or 3 months, I absolutely knew there was something very special to come out the other end of it. And the irony was, when I went for my redundancy interview, I didn't tell them I was pregnant because I still couldn't speak about it at that point. But they said, I'm very sorry, we can't let you go. You're not getting your package. And definitely, I'm not breaking confidence, just realizing, but that was, for my line manager to tell me, that was a difficult thing, because I was pretty sure she's gone. So they didn't, and actually I stayed on. I had my baby, and when he was 6 weeks old, I applied for this job now, as promised. Not part of any career plan, as you can. I really thought I love business, and I love our businesses in Northern Ireland, and I think one of the key things that we're missing is to grow what we have in terms of the 99% of the business population. So I was passionate about that, but actually God had called me, I believe, to do the job that I'm doing now, which I absolutely love, and I get to transform a campus, and I actually get to continue to research what I'm doing, because actually I get to work with businesses and all of our stakeholders anyway. So, and what I did in that time as well, I really had an idea for a book. And in my maternity leave, I really struggled with daytime TV and all of that, and I was breastfeeding at the time. So I decided to write a book, and that's when I published my book. So that is what comes out of disruption, and I have to say, for me, what helped me to change my perspective was thankfulness. It's amazing how when you are thankful for what you have, that is what enables you to pivot and to change. The second exercise I'm going to tell you about is a thing called white space. And I see white space versus hurry. Okay? There is a condition of modern living which is called overload, and I don't know about you, but if you ever speak to people and you say, how are you? Oh, flat out, I'm busy. And there's people have there's not enough time. We've got a real issue, and every time you talk to people, it's the same story. Even my sister-in-law, who doesn't have any children and just has a dog, flat out, it doesn't work. Do you mean we just have this condition of modern living where we are which I'm just let's swap lives, please. But there is just so much there to keep us busy, and the reason is that all of that hurry is actually helping to minimize our impact in our workplace. We have this thing that the world is telling us we have to be all things to all people, keep all the balls up in the air because that's the only way to do it. It's a total lie. And back about 2 years ago, a good friend of mine told me to read this book called Margin. I mentioned it at the beginning, another book. And 2 years ago, I was making great progress. I promised I had my book published. I got some more research grants. My PhD students were coming through to completion, and I just got my professorship. So life was really good. Things were really good. And but that Christmas, I hit a really low point. And on one hand, I could see people could say success. She's doing really well. She's had a baby, all of this. But I knew that I had no margin in my life. So when I say margin, it's the difference between your resources, what you have in terms of whether that's time or money, whatever, minus your load, the demands on your life. And my life was absolutely saturated. And I knew that I wanted some margin back in my life. I knew, and I thought my choice is either do I increase my resource to get my mum to help me even more than she is? Do I hire more cleaner another day, or do I get someone to help me? What is it I can do to create some margin? Which really wasn't going to do any difference, but what I had to do was I had to reduce my load. And I had to regain control of progress. You see, progress, especially as a leader, it's how we're wired, is that we achieve, we create impact, and then it becomes this thing that's really hard to feed, because it's really hard to say no whenever there's great things to do. And I had another problem. I had a problem because I could set my alarm early to go to circuits or go for a run, but I wasn't setting my day up in terms of my faith. And that's the reality. Don't get me wrong, I went to church, I was in small group, I was reading my Bible, and I was fitting it in around my mental demands, but I didn't have that habitation of knowing that I was doing life with Jesus and the Holy Spirit in my everyday life. Now, margin is not a spiritual necessity, okay? But availability is. I believe in my faith that God is asking us to be available. And on one hand, I was looking at my diary, and goodness, I had no availability for my husband, but but I had other availabilities and I had choices to make. And I think that was a massive lesson to me, and I have to say, again, no destination yet. I stand here in the present tense. I am learning to shift things in my life, and I'm learning to set limits. And I just want to tell you, there's 3 things that I'm doing to help me do that, just as a very practical way. I say no a heck of a lot more than I say yes. It's a very simple thing. I find that really hard. Again, the perfectionist tendencies are, oh yes, yes, yes. And then think afterwards, oh my goodness, how am I going to fit that in? Somebody told me what you say. We had a women's network, and this fantastic lady said, and I said, well, how do you say no nicely whenever it's a really good thing? You say, thank you so much for thinking of me, but I'll get back to you on that. And I've been practicing that, and it's amazing that people aren't offended by that, and it's okay to say no. The second thing I've done, I pre-scheduled my life to 80%. I have an amazing PA that really helps me do this. So what I was doing is I was scheduling my life to 120%. So whenever I had to take a child to the doctors, or do you know when a child gets sick at like the worst time in your, like you've either got an event or whatever, so I have no space to allow for those natural things that happen in life. Are you getting sick yourself? So what I do is I schedule my diary to 80%. And that just lets me have that little bit of time. If something does come, then I'm like, it's okay, because I can make it up here. And the last thing is I practice white space, which is what I said to you earlier. So I hired an executive coach about maybe 6 years ago, and she wrote an article. She was incredible. She worked for Microsoft. She was their head of HR in Microsoft, and she's in Vancouver. And she said that what you do is you create 2 hours a week in your diary, not during family time, okay, so not in recreation, but you fit in 2 hours in your working day where you do nothing except have a book, blank piece of paper, and a pen, no technology. And when she told me, I was like, what, 2 hours? I said, I could never do that, I don't have time for that. And she said to me, and that was part of, couldn't believe I was paying her to tell me to do that. But anyway, needless to say, it was horrendous the first time I did it. It lasted 10 minutes. The second time I did it, I think it was about 20 minutes. And then I learned that coffee shops just weren't the place to do it, that I had to go somewhere else. And actually, I went and I bought a beautiful white book, because it's white space and I'm perfectionist and it had to be all right. And actually, that's where I wrote down all my ideas, and that's where my book was actually birthed during that time. So it's a huge challenge, and I know a lot of people struggle with it, but there's something when you intentionally set aside. So for me, I had to get up even earlier and get away early to do that. So it's not about taking the time from your family or your social time, but in your working, whether that's taking an extended lunch break and staying an extra hour doing it. And I have to say that I'm still learning, because I haven't done it as much recently. So I'm certainly, again, not there. So the third exercise is generosity. So it's generosity versus just being selfish. And when I say generosity, I believe we live in a time where narcissism is on the rise and empathy is in decline. And we have a big problem that what that is bringing, and that is what's feeding this leadership that's unhealthy, that is bringing disconnection, not connection. So this CMI reports, this headline was on generosity. I couldn't believe it. I thought, this is incredible, generous leadership. So unpacking that is that we can so easily be ruled by emails and to-do lists, and certainly in the university, a lot of meetings, agendas, deadlines. I mean, there's lots of things in reports, but we need to take time to listen as great leaders. And when I say listen, I mean put the phone to the side, put the laptop to the side, and deeply listen to the person that is sitting in front of you. Because I said at the very beginning, this is about the whole person in work. Because whether we like it or not, somebody will come and talk to you, and actually whatever they're dealing with in their personal life or outside of that will manifest itself in some way in your environment. And you may rule it out as she's very grumpy, or she's really rude, or it's this, and actually it's just transference. It's something else that they're going through. And that's just a really important lesson. And the research, really hear this, so this is what the world is saying, the research around generosity, it makes you a better person. says there's a theologian called Henry Newman, and this is what he said, and this is what I read last week. He said, when we refrain from giving with a scarcity mentality, the little that we have becomes a lot less. Whereas if we give generously with this abundance mentality, this growth mentality, what we actually give away multiplies. And that is what the research telling us. So there we have this theologian, and there we have the world telling us that we need generosity in our leadership. And I want to introduce you to the leadership dance. This is a thing that I've learned. I'm doing this in my leadership. I'm not going to dance in front of you because it's only a 3-step move. But essentially, this is what I believe when I'm talking about generosity and when you're talking about listening, is you take one step forward, close enough for people to still see you, and then you take a step beside them, where actually what you do is you talk about the journey that you're on. And then there's some times where you'll take the step where you actually have to move behind them and to encourage them to keep going. So it's a 3-step move. So it's, yes, you have to lead, you have to make the step, and you've got to move forward. But there are times where you step to the side and you journey it with people, and there's times where you actually come behind them and you're helping people and you're pushing them on. So the last one that I want to talk about is about relearning risk. I could have called this lots of different words, but I suppose it's around playing it safe and feeling forward. As John Maxwell loves to say, feel forward or relearn risk. To lead us to is to learn and to grow. And I think that when we look at the Bible, this is where I get my hope from. When I face all of the adversity and all of the challenges, that God didn't go to Abraham or Moses or Esther and say, really like you to do me a favour. It's not going to take too much time, and honestly, it'll not inconvenience you. He never said that, ever. In fact, I believe that God is really intrusive. He's very persuasive of time, and actually, we are to expect that, business won't be easy all of the time. Your leadership in your, whatever that context, being a mother is not easy all of the time. Being a grandmother, being a whatever it is not easy. And you have to know that adversity is a given, and I'm sure I would love to hear all of the stories, but when you're in leadership, challenge, it's constant. They talk about change being the only constant. Well, my goodness, in leadership, challenge is definitely. But there is something around how you deal with it. So for me, I had to change my relationship with failure. And I find that actually we need a bit of failure. I'm not talking failure, the ultimate result, but actually failure in the process, because what we learn in the failure is so precious. And if you respond and you have the right mindset and the heart around that, it'll actually grow you, and that is where the shift comes. And I have to say that leadership, I had this discussion, I'm losing my PA in work. Oh my goodness, it's really, really hard. I mean, I only do my job because of her, and she's incredible. But one of the things that I have learned, and I manage PhD researchers, is that we think that leadership is the gold standards to keep everybody together. Keep everybody together for as long as you can, and that's the gold standard of leadership. Actually, the gold standard of leadership is actually growing other people, which means they will leave you. If you're doing your job well as a leader, people will leave you. And my incredible secretary has got the most amazing promotion, which I always knew she would have, because she was basically in a job where she could have, she was 10 times overqualified. So as I said to her, this is part, I actually feel so proud. I mean, I'm heartbroken. I think I'm bipolar about the whole thing. On one hand, I'm absolutely heartbroken. On the other hand, I'm like, yes! Look how much she's grown, and she's going for this incredible project manager job, which is just amazing. But that is that little lesson, is that actually, how do you deal with failure and disappointment? Because we're in the business of people. And human nature is human nature, and they will, you're going to be disappointed. People will fail you. But how you deal with that is actually where 90% of the growth happens. So just finally then is round, I suppose pulling this all together, is that actually, at the very beginning, I said of leadership being rewritten. The reality is, it's been retold. It's been retold in a story that happened 2,000 years ago as an example of Jesus. That's what I believe. And actually, my leadership role and where I'm at now is very much work in progress and very much unfinished business. But I was reading that actually, when you rewrite or when you're writing your story, write it in pencil. I'm a great believer in journaling. I love to write everything down. And you write your story in pencil with a wee rubber on the top and a eraser at the top. And the reason that you do that, as you pursue your calling and your leadership, whatever your purpose is in life, some experiences that you have, and certainly in mine, end with a full stop. There's others, believe me, have many more question marks of I don't know why and I don't understand, but that's okay. And there's other moments that have been huge exclamation mark, like what? A huge amazing moment or a huge surprise. Like finding out I was pregnant. But often I think what we don't pay attention to as leaders is the pause that comes with the comma. And given the context and given the condition of our modern world and what we live in, it's the pause of the comma will actually help us to reflect and to know, right, hang on, do you need to get back to basics here? Where do I need to be? And who it is you're leaning on and where your wisdom comes from. So that, I hope, has been interesting and thought-provoking. And essentially, it's just my story. It's just my faith. It's been my journey so far, more than likely well over halfway of my life. But if there's any questions or people want to, I don't know where Andrew is. He said to me, maybe, Andrew, would you do any questions? I'm happy to take any questions if you have any. Because I know I overloaded you quite a lot.
Does anyone have a question for Karise? Oh, she's here. What did Andrew say to get you to say yes?
To this? To this? Well, do you know